Welcome back to Tools and Track. Yeah. Right, so what was originally going to be a cutscene on the next season of Auto Test the Limit, which is going to be coming this year, I promise, I decided to do a bit of tactical upgrade, just to give it a little bit of beans. However, it's not really went according to plan. What will now follow is 6 or so episodes explaining my absolute catastrophe. And to kick that off, we need to go back 3 months ago. So this is the start of this story. Get comfy, get a coffee on. This is going to take a while. So let's start with the why, or to recap, let's start with the why not. Last year, I said that I wanted to keep this guy naturally aspirated so that I proved a point by beating non-naturally aspirated cars and, you know, did something that was quite challenging. Viewers will remember that we finished second in the Auto Solo Championship, so have I achieved that? Well, we didn't win the championship, but technically, yes, every Mark 1 and Mark 2 MX5 that had forced induction finished behind me in the championship. So, in my eyes, I have proven the point. What we're going to do this year is make sure, beyond all doubt, that I'm in with a chance of winning it. Now, I have 2 options to do this, and both of them are viable. Option 1, the low cost. Now that's a separate thing, we're not talking about this right now, but if you just joined us, go and watch all of the low cost stuff and you'll see why I'm talking about that. Option 2 is to make sure that this thing, with its power disadvantage, no longer has a power disadvantage. So no matter what I take to do a championship with, it's got a good chance of winning. That's the why. Now comes the how. Open sesame. It's in here somewhere. Open sesame. To catch up, for those who can't be arsed watching the channel, the car currently runs on throttle bodies. In order to make this happen, we have a Mega Squirt sitting in there, one of the Gen 2s, or MS2, or whatever they call it. But anyway, the point is, it's got all the capacity it needs to run this, plus also boost referencing if we ever need to put turbochargers near it, which we now do. If you want to know more about the ECU stuff, that episode is up here somewhere. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the advantages stop. Being on throttle bodies, there's not much else that's going to support putting a turbo near it. I have a fuel pressure regulator here. That might do me a wee favour. I'm going to go have a look in to see whether or not it's vacuum and boost referenced. If it is, great, that saves me messing around with this. But basically everything else either needs to be modified or removed. But don't worry, this is not going to go to waste. After all, that is going on the low cost. Because why the hell not? Right, in order to turbocharge a car that did not come from the factory with a turbo, there are a number of things you must consider. The engine itself is a big point. If you want to handle turbo power safely, really you should be taking it apart, changing the pistons, uprating bearings, doing all sorts of things that makes that actual engine unit handle the increased load that it's going to be going under. We're doing none of that. And the reason I'm going to be doing none of that is we are not doing massive amounts of boost. Well, not at this stage. All I want to be doing right now is giving it a little bit extra poke to make it more competitive. So the engine itself is going to get nil. I know it's a strong lump. I've been bouncing it off the limiter for long enough. So I've got a fairly astute guess that we can get away with small amounts of boost, much in the same way that we did with the TVR. Now, also in the same way the TVR, I don't recall if we ever did a shortlist on the things that you do need to consider, but nobody watched it anyway, so we're going to do it again. If you're going to increase the amount of airflow that is going into the engine, the first thing you need to do is match the respective amount of fuel. So you need to upgrade the fuel pump. That allows it to flow more pressure, which we needed to increase against the excess pressure of air that's going to now be going into the engine. So that is mandatory. Walbro do a good range, and they've been at the game for years, so that's a good option to use, and the 255 is probably going to be around the right kind of litres per hour range, because let's be honest, it's not going wild. 255 is perfect for 300 odd brake. We're not even going to reach that. In association with this, and as we have discussed earlier on, the fuel pressure regulator must be upgraded too. That's because the FPR, as we will call it, normally operates in, well, space atmospheres, from 0 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere, i.e. vacuum. It's now going to have to think about +1 atmosphere and beyond, therefore there is going to have to be a change in that. There are many options, don't worry, this is in the bag. That's the fuel side. what else do we need to consider? Bit of a no-brainer, but the turbo and the manifold will need to be procured. I'm going to keep it simple with this. We're going to go TD04, normally found in Subaru Imprezas and the like, and the manifold will be a cast steel one. Now, do not think I am skimping out by doing this. There are multiple options out there for stainless steel massive tubular guys, but in the price point I'm looking at, they have inherent problems. They crack. They don't like the weight, they expand at different rates, and it just isn't a good, robust solution for getting that turbo to blow from the engine. Therefore, a cast one of a reputed brand will be much better. So, G19 is probably going to be the option there. ECU has always got to be considered because a standard ECU will look at anything above 1 atmosphere and go, I don't know what's going on here, and shut the whole game down and go into limp or whatever. So that has to be considered. We've already done it, so it's off our list for now. This 3-letter acronym, also beginning with E, cannot be ignored though. Exhaust gas recirculation. We are putting on this, which will remove one part of that exhaust gas recirculation system, and it, generally speaking, doesn't like to run in boost either, if it was never designed for it in the first place. So we're going to delete it altogether. But injectors are going to be something, along with increased fuel, that we need to look at. I didn't really put them in there because it's almost more of an electronic thing as much as it is a fuel thing. But we have to up the flow that these can do in order to up the fuel going into the engine for upping the amount of air going into the engine. Last of all, cooling. Now, this is a kind of one-fits-all title, but there's a lot to consider here. First of all, the engine itself will be running hotter because as soon as you put more air in and more fuel in, you are generating more heat. That has to be removed from the equation or you will lose power. I have already got a massive big alloy radiator in there, and not once during all of the fun skidding and auto testing have I ever had an overheat situation. I'm pretty sure I'm never going to have it again, but it's something we'll monitor because there's not many other options I have available for increasing the cooling. However, intake charge cooling is something everyone knows lots about with turbo stuff, apparently, but it's something that has to really happen. Probably doesn't if you're only running like actuator pressure because, well, you know, it's only up in the boost a little bit, but as soon as you increase that air charge, you increase the heat going in, which basically means that you're putting denser amounts of air into the engine, but at a warmer temperature, which isn't quite as good for the efficiency as putting cooler, denser air in. Therefore, if you can cool it between the turbo and the intake where it goes into the engine, you're onto a winner. I have two options here. We can do air-to-air intercooling, which is basically the intercoolers everyone hangs off the front of the bumpers when they've Vauxhall Corsas, or we can do charge cooling. There are pros and cons with both, but for the sake of cost at this point, and it's not something I'm saying we're not going to reconsider, we're just going to go with an air-to-air intercooler. There are other little nibbles we'll have to work out along the way, but generally speaking, that's your list when you want to put turbo on a non-turbo car. Fuel pump's going to be interesting, mainly because it's actually a very, very simple job, as long as you've not got a great big bar in the way of where the fuel pump is supposed to come out from. So, this could be fun. Yeah, that's subtle. Right, I'm over my hangover. Today's D-Day. I'm actually going to cut the throat and start doing this turbo conversion today. Now, a bit of background. I've bought this turbo conversion from a well-known company that do a full kit because I'm on a bit of a time crunch. I just want it to all be plug and play. Now, plug and play is a big motto of this company, and I'm about to tell you why they're talking nonsense. So as you can see, I've prepped the old manifold. Remember, the one that we painted for the low cost, then realised wouldn't fit the low cost. At least now I get to use it. And one of the first things we've done is put on the EGR blanks. Now there's an EGR valve here that we've blanked, and the EGR feed pipe that comes in from the exhaust manifold into here. First prime against plug and play is as follows. This doesn't come with nuts, so that's fine. You would just reuse the nuts from the original one. I've clearly lost them, so a couple of 10mm Nylox solves that problem. However, the actual valve blank and plug doesn't come with bolts either. Now that is a bit of a problem because the issue you've got with the valve is it comes with very, very long bolts because it's a very, very thick thing, and the plate is not. So I've had to go and source a couple of bolts that will fit. Luckily they're only 8mm on a standard thread, but still, it's not plug and play. if you don't have all the bolts. Now, let's go and cut the throat of an MX5. Right, step one is going to be taking the throttle bodies off. We're going to have to do this in a bit of a two-stager because, well, we're having to map ourselves. We don't have the facilities to really go to town on that. I want to put the original manifold on and get it running with a mega squirt on the new injectors before we start strapping boost on and put proper risk onto things. So, air filter on, normal induction, basic MX5 running on aftermarket ECU is step one. We've got an AEM one because the other one I won't really get into until we get into plugging it onto the low cost. It wasn't going to boost reference well. So proper boost reference and a fuel pressure regulator and we're good. Now, the problem with putting a brand new fuel pressure regulator on is it's still, after having been parked up for 20 minutes, showing pressure. So I'm going to have to try and get this to bleed down and get the fuel out of this system before I break any of the fuel system because, well, it's going to put high pressure fuel everywhere if I don't. Let's let the engine deal with that before, you know, the chassis legs have to. So that'll be step one. And then, then we need to get into these fuel injector bungs. Now these injectors live in the head, which is a very unusual design. I don't know why Mazda opted to do it. Presumably to save space because it moves everything closer in. Remember, the injectors have to sit sort of 45 degrees. To put them in the inlet manifold would mean the whole inlet manifold would have to sit further out, or there'd be a flow restriction. So there is a logic to it, but it does make things a bit more difficult when you're modifying things. So what the Genv or Maruha throttle body kit came with was little bung plates that were supposed to press in and just live in the head and keep that vacuum leak plugged. But the problem with that is they didn't, and I've got the testament to prove it on the bonnet. You'll see I've got a ding that I need to deal with when it's paint time because we had a backfire and it exploded one of these out with the kind of velocity that dents metal. So then after putting that back in, we decided to do an epoxy bond around it all just to let it bite. Now that was great, we never had any issues since then. Until now, because the issue I have is these need to come out, and not only have we trapped them in, we've also epoxied them. So these are more than likely going to have to be remade and drilled out or forced out in some fashion. But the problem with even that is the head itself cannot be damaged because it is a critical sealing path for the injectors. Like, they have to be in that little slot perfectly. Any nicks, any kind of bars or whatever else, and you'll get a fuel leak or a vacuum leak. So yeah, I'm kind of not looking forward to that part. So let's get the throttle bodies off first and give us clear access, and we can see how we got on with that. Right, what's going on here is I have read the handbook. Now, having looked into the weird stuff that we used to bond these in, it's an epoxy, and science says the best stuff to break down an epoxy is acetone. Now, whether or not that's true for this remains to be seen, but in the absence of any other bright ideas, we've just brushed the wells in of this completely, immersing it in acetone, which will probably last about 2 minutes because it'll evaporate quicker than it'll break it down. But I'm going to just keep repeating this process. And the logic here is, as soon as it starts to break down, we will chisel it out with the screwdriver so that the last of the acetone simply needs to break down whatever remains around the side. Thus far, it has been completely ineffective, so that's probably a surprise to nobody. We're going to be at this for a wee while, but the acetone is having an effect. I wish I hadn't been quite so liberal with the application of glue though. We have a Daniel, therefore we have made more progress.
Hello.
The injectors are fun. So the kit comes with EV14 injectors, and it's EV10s that normally exist in this.
Yeah, and it also comes with those horrible
Adapters.
that I absolutely hate. These should go in the bin whenever you get these.
Tell us what you really think.
They're terrible. No, they're terrible. You put these on, and all that happens is they sit and rattle around and don't make connection. They just melt your engine, so they're really good.
Yeah, so we've not used them, and instead, what Daniel has done is re-crimped on EV14 connectors direct to the loom.
Yeah, so your new injector will now just
Go straight in.
plug in.
Yeah, don't do it, because it'll be...
I won't actually do it, but yeah.
So, what has, however, been a bit more of a challenge is finding all of the original fuel rail. We'll say fuel rail, because that's the right word for it, and I couldn't think of it. So, yeah, we've got a return adapter to get rid of that, because we've now got this. So that can just go straight on with some hose. However, what we didn't have was any of the bolts or any other stuff. So knowing...
These fancy kind of spacer.
Yeah, so I had to find another source, which was this. So we now have throttle bodies in all cars very quickly, because it was easier to just take all this off and put that out of the way.
Just disassemble the car.
We'll come back to that some other day.
Brian's just talking into the mic.
That's fine, Brian. and not to mention crinkling. Everyone loves to hear crinkling.
You don't need this. You could use the standard fuel pressure regulator and set up and it would be fine, but
I like it.
These are better.
Yeah.
It is better having a proper...
It's called future-proofing.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to go and do silly things...
And these will always be more accurate than the standard setup.
Which,
so
after 27 years we've just worked out, 27 years, it's probably ready for the bin.
Yeah,
so
well worth doing.
Now all that remains at this stage is to put the inlet manifold on. I did consider running the oil pressure adapter to feed line, because it takes off from right underneath the inlet manifold where the gauge is and runs round to the turbo. But the problem is we're not putting the turbo on yet, because we want to undo throttle body. So what we need to do is get a base map on the Mega Squirt and make it run with the old manifold again, because we never actually did that. We just put the Mega Squirt and the throttle bodies on, so we've got no frame of reference.
It was still on Alpha N, so that when we put the throttle bodies on, it was already kind of set up to run with the throttle bodies, but this time we need to go back to volumetric efficiency, because it's going to have a turbo.
Volumetric efficiency requirements.
So we need to get it running first.
Needless to say, we need to do some fudgery to get that to happen. So it's just going to go to a stock car with the manifold and no turbo, and then we're going to plug in a map and see if it's going to work.
Get it running. Like, I've already got a very good idea of what this needs for fuel and timing, so I'll tune it like that, as if it's going to get the turbo, and it'll be absolutely fine to just drive around because there's no turbo. And then what we'll do is when we attach turbo, it's basically ready to go. Just need to give it a wee tweak.
If you're watching this as a how-to guide, this will only apply if you've taken throttle bodies on.
It's a very kind of
very specific
way of doing it.
Very specific way of doing it. Anyway, so next step is put the manifold on. Well, I just took it around the block because we have to make sure it does drive with the old manifold and something resembling a bass tune on. And it doesn't feel great, I'm not gonna lie. Taking a car that was set up and ran so well with throttle bodies and putting it more or less back to stock, it's crap, really. It just doesn't make all the barky, happy noises it used to. All you can hear is a droning exhaust, actually. So I'm quite glad that when the turbo goes on, that will shut that up a wee bit. But yeah, we're at the lowest step really on the kit, because basically it's not even on yet. So we've done an EGR delete, we've put an uprated fuel pump in, we've got the aftermarket ECU doing what it needs to do. So now it's all in front of us like a wheelbarrow. So in the next episode, naturally, we're going to get into actually fitting the turbo and see how easy this kit's going to be to install. So until then, patreon.com/toolsandtrack if you want to be a supporter of awesome little projects like this. If not, yeah, cool, just do the like bell, subscribe. If you've got socials, get this shared in some way or another. Even giving us a wee recommendation on a car page using Facebook, that would be mega. It's the only way we grow. And until next weekend, guys, drive safe.